Welcome to APA's weekly webinar. My name is Billy Zydick, Manager Special Projects for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to APA's webpage later this afternoon. You'll receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days with a link to the webpage where all webinar recordings are housed, as well as a link to our upcoming webinars. We have webinars planned out through 2021 and open for registration. Professional continuing education credits are being offered for today's program. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your question in the chat box, and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be directed to the person asking the question by our presenter. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Chuck Farnsworth. Chuck, take it away.
Well, good day to everybody. I hope that it has been a pleasant day. I want to kind of set, if you will, the stage for your note-taking and so on. I am going to make the primary PowerPoints and so on and so forth that we're going to discuss today available. And so you'll be able to request those from Billy, and as Billy said, the recording of this is going to be posted. I've taken the facilitator privilege today to, when we talk about assets, and certainly the three key assets that I've been working with a lot as I've been working with FM facilities around the nation is financial, physical, but also I've really started to address what I believe is our greatest leveraged asset, and that's our human asset, our people asset. When we take a look at, and I know most of you know this, at the total campus experience, I really believe those of us in FM and operations contribute as much to the total campus experience, if you will, as the academic side of the house and athletic side of the house and so on. Because what our people do gives first impressions, and with those first impressions, it attracts students, it retains students, and it certainly increases the graduation rate. So what I'm going to share with you is some of the things that, as I've worked from campus to campus around the nation, I put it together in a format of talking about 4 quadrants. We're going to move along pretty quickly here, but again, as I said, you will have access to these PowerPoints and so on. I want to start off with just a quick, if you will, kind of scoring your own organization in your mind, because these are things that strike at the root of how people really give of themselves. I'm one that really believes we have to increase the level of initiative that people have and the level of responsibility that our people have. And there's certain things that are pretty simplistic for us to do, and they need to be put in place in most effective organizations. And so I'd like to go down and read these to you, and just very quickly on your middle blackboard or on the score pad, just kind of answer what your gut tells you, a yes or a no. And as you can see at the bottom, there's a score sheet. So just yes or no. Does every team member know exactly what the team goals are? Just yes or no. Are we clear on what our specific goals are? Not at 35,000 feet, but the goals within the team. Does every team member know his or her role and what to do in achieving the goal? Those two are tied very quickly or very closely together. Does every team member know the score? In other words, does every team member know what the measure of success are and where the team is in relationship to those measures? You might also say, how often do you visit how well we're doing in progress? Does every team member meet regularly and frequently to account to each other for the goals? I think the key question there is the team member accountable to the leader and the supervisor, or is the team members accountable to each other for producing the goal? Are you actively moving towards the middle? And what I mean by this is the fact that helping everyone towards performance levels, not just our best performers or just not our weakest performers. Most organizations are divided by 20, 20, and 60 in the middle. And when it comes to building culture and producing results, far too many times that 60 in the middle are overlooked for the sake of those that are not producing and those that are producing in a grateful way. Is repeat business high percentage of your revenues? In other words, how do our end users or our customers see how well we are doing? Do you have low employee turnover rate for our industry? Do we have a lot of moving in and out, or do people pretty much come and stay? Are you confident you're doing the job that people want us to do in our institutions for them? Are we clear on that? Do you feel you're clear on that? Do your customers have a simple, streamlined experience when it comes to invoices, when it comes to work orders, and so on? Is it cumbersome and delayed, or is it immediate and exact? Our team members are organized by the mission. They are undeterred by fear and by anxiety, specifically of the times that we find ourselves in now. And at the bottom, you can just see, you can have a total and you can see where you, and hopefully most of us on the phone are, or on the computers are up into at least 8 or above. And I'm going to assume that most of the organizations that I go to are specifically in the 7 and 8 range. And their results are a little bit uneven, but the fact is they're certainly being very successful. I find in facilities management and operations that basically we're pretty good at getting the job done and producing. So I just wanted to run by that by you so you could kind of do a self-assessment of where you feel like your team is within your own organization. Much of what we're doing when it comes to the human asset is this little see, do, get model that was developed by Stephen Covey. Is far too many times when it comes to the human asset, we're so focused on results that we really don't pay the price to put the practices and the behaviors in place. And the driving force of that is how our people, this is becoming more and more prevalent, is how our people view what we're asking them to do. You know, Simon Sinek, I'm a real follower of his. And if you ever have an opportunity to go online and take a look at the Golden Circle, he's talking about most people know what to do and they know how to do it, but they're not clear on why to do it. And it's the why that really creates that desire for the practices to implement the practices to get the results. Also, the why gives people a much greater sense of contribution, that just not a job. And so this little see, do, get model, when it comes to the motivation cycle, I have found to be very, very beneficial in working with organizations. And here's just a few paradigm shifts. As I've worked with organizations, then these are all directly related to the FM. Is number one is this task of leading people to have a greater sense of contribution, commitment, and aligning their choices with what needs to be done for the organization, but also for the team and themselves, isn't as difficult as sometimes as consultants would make it. Just if you would just think for a moment, think of a leader or somebody that you've reported to that you really enjoyed working for, that you know that you have been valued, that you know your contribution is one that is appreciated. And think of the behaviors of that individual that puts you to that point. You wanted to be influenced by that individual. You extended trust to that individual. Two of the greatest gifts as a leader that a person in our stewardship can extend to us is influence and trust. Think of a leader that you couldn't wait to get out from under, or every day was a drudgery. You didn't like going into work. And think of the behaviors that they exonerated that basically put you into that mindset. It's the same thing with the culture. What type of a culture do you want to work for? And are you contributing behaviorally to that culture? What type of a culture was a drudgery for you? It kind of goes back to treat people as you want to be treated. And we together create what we want to have together through our willingness and our discipline to exonerate those behaviors. So this isn't difficult. It's just following common, agreed upon truths and then bringing the discipline in order to have it. That's where the difficulty becomes. Redefine leadership. I think one of the things that we can leverage most in having people feel more of a contribution is to realize their choices that they make on a daily basis either contribute to the mission and the goal or distract from the mission and the goal. Many times I've been in a group and I turned around and I've asked a group, even of 400 people, how many leaders are in here? Supervisors usually raise their hands, the directors raise their hands, but it's always surprising to me how many people who are on the front lines do not raise their hand that they're a leader. However, it's to be forgiven because everybody is so scripted to positional power. Everybody is so scripted. You're not a leader unless people report to you. Now, one of the things that I've learned in my journey is everyone is a leader. The greatest role that you can have at all is the integrity over the choices that you make that define who you are as a person, whether it's a father, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member, whether it's an employee who has been blessed with steward over other people at work. The fact is, everyone is a leader. And believe me, those leadership choices they make when they're in the buildings, they're on the grounds, they're working on our equipment, are vital, absolutely vital to the success of the organization. Another one is, how do we help people in our circle of influence and in their paradigms embrace change rather than change disrupts their world and disrupts their stability and their security? I think this is a key one now. We often talk about the pandemic and now the vaccinations of the pandemic ending. But to be quite frank, the effects of the pandemic on higher education and institutions, probably for the next 3 to 4 years, is going to create change that we've never dealt with before. Are we going to be asked to do more with less? Most likely. How can we take, and rather than letting change disrupt stability and security, how can we prepare people to embrace it and move forward with it? Integrity of choice, it's just the fact our choices define who we are. Our choices define the contribution that we make within our homes. Our choices define the contribution that we make within our roles that we have at work. And then lastly, what I've discovered is reconnecting people with contribution really helps them align themselves that it's just not a job. I can remember I was one of our major universities in the United States, and everybody had left the room, and a young lady came in with her 55-gallon drum on rollers. She was a custodian for the room, probably had about 40 years experience. And I just walked over to her and I said, "Is this your room?" And she said, "It certainly is. It's been my room for 15 years. And I said, "Well, it's immaculate." I said, what do you do? I mean, this room is beautiful. She says, "I'm essential. What I do here for this university is essential." I thought she'd been to a workshop. But what basically she was saying is, I make a difference. This just isn't a job to me. And she looked at me and she said, "When you came in here, did you find this room to be clean?" "Well, absolutely." She said, "Did you see any gum on the floors, on the carpeting?" "I work like heck to get that gum off its carpeting when some student uses it or something." She was so proud of the work and so on that she did. I can tell you this specific woman was not somebody that needed to be supervised, because there isn't a supervisor that would hold her more accountable than she was holding herself. What's the difference between that person and the person that sits back and has to wait to be told? And then on this specific slide, the last thing is, I know most of you know this, so this is a little ambiguous, maybe not for some. But today, when we're dealing with people, and I don't even like to refer to our frontline people anymore as employees. I like to refer to them as people. And it's all about relationships. It's very easy when we focus upward or at our own level. When we start working with the human asset inside of the organization, it's the people and the relation. You know, I learned this from another colleague. He said, he used to say, organizations say that the greatest asset that they have are their employees or the human asset. He said, when it comes to organizational mission driving results, the greatest asset an organization has is the relationships and the way people work together. Not just the individuals, but the way that they work together. And as I've been working with you across the nation, these are some of the things that I put into a separate presentation. Let me move on. Here's what I wanted to spend most of the time with you is I think to get predictable results in these times that we have, there's 4 quadrants that when it comes to the human asset, we kind of need to address. How do we transform fear into engagement? Move with the speed of trust. We see trust as something that's measurable, it's leverageable, and we can create it no matter where we are now. If we have the desire and the will, we can increase trust in an organization. Achieve more value with less, and then execute priorities with excellence. And so I'm going to talk a little about each one of these. And at the end of the presentation, you might have some questions that either if we have time I can address, or if you want to drop us an email, that I'll be happy to address them, and I'll be happy to get back with you. What's the difference between an obstacle and an opportunity? Our attitude towards it. Every opportunity has a difficulty, and every difficulty has an opportunity. Truly, truly believe this. Okay, let's talk about transforming fear into engagement. How we can do this so that it doesn't hamstring us and have people taking hand off of the proverbial flywheel. Here's some of the common institutional fears that we deal with. You can read these on your own. Fear of making mistakes. One of the greatest ones that I find when I go out and work, even in FM, which basically are fairly healthy cultures, there are so many people have the fear of retribution and repercussion. It's one of the greatest limiting factors of straight talk. And it's one of the greatest things that I think a frontline supervisor or director should try to eliminate if he wants to have a policy. Stephen Covey used to say to me, you know, Chuck, the higher you go into an organization, you can become so insulated from what's happening in the front lines. And the reason for that is simply the fact that people won't talk to you. Another quote that I love, it's a sad time in an organization when the most passionate people become silent. And one of the greatest things that people becoming silent is retribution and repercussions. Fear caused by inconsistent leadership, that the leadership team isn't on the same page when it comes to the cultures and so on they want to create. Government intervention, we're really involved in that quite a bit right now. Fear by lack of knowledge, information, communication, and understanding. I'll address that here in just a minute more specifically. Driven by a lack of vision, and this goes back to Simon Sinek's why. It's just not important to understand the mission of an organization and the vision we have to fulfill it, but what's my purpose? How's it making the greater contribution? Especially when we talk about the total campus experience. I want every employee to feel like that young lady felt at that university that was a custodian and had been a custodian, or at least at that level, for about 30 to 40 years. fear of being vulnerable. I find that to be very, very true in mid-level management. Vulnerable to the people that report to them by possibly being too transparent and so on, or vulnerable by pointing out the things that need to be pointed out to people whom they report to. And then naturally, if you will, the fear of change. Here is what helps with this. And that is, and this is a very useful PowerPoint. If I had you in a seminar, what I would have you do is I would have you list the people who report directly to you, and I would have you put them on this level of engagement scale. Now, when we talk about the 60% in an organization and an FM, I'm thinking it's more like 70% of people are above this line. But I also think of the 70% and above the line, probably 50% are cheerful cooperation. About maybe another 15% are heartfelt commitment, and 5% or so are creatively excited. But we also, I think, have an advantage over some of the corporate entities and so on. We don't have a lot of people that are specifically miscellaneous, obedient, or rebels and quit. Most of our rebels retire or stay. But fact is, probably we need to work with honing our skills of how do we move people vertically, because that is directly connected to their choices and the choices that they make. And the choices that they make put energy towards the contribution that we need to make as an individual, a team, or across FM as a whole. So if you get my PowerPoints later, this would be an interesting exercise for you to do. How engaged are your team members? And place them on this scale. How does their engagement influence the team? In other words, how does one person's lack of engagement influence the team? How does those people that are deeply engaged influence the team? And then how does it impact our results? And really take a realistic look at this, because the other thing is it directly is related to the levels of empowerment. And this is where a leader has to look at their own skill. Some people want their employees to wait to be told. They don't like to get recommendations from their employees. They would rather instruct them. Another thing that I learned on my own management thing is when I give a person a goal and I take the responsibility of telling him how to do it, I also take the responsibility for the goal. I even find that to be true today. So it's a matter of how can you empower somebody with a goal and a task that needs to be done, but at the same time you can allow yourself to be vulnerable, that you don't have to micromanage and be prescriptive on how they do it or how they get it done. I would say for the most part, I would want to have my team working at somewhere between and knowing when they need to report immediately. But I'd like to have most of my team working to where they take the initiative and they report periodically. And they're very clear on when they need to report immediately. And you may have some team members that just do it. But when we get down to the attend to, or we get down to they have to wait and ask, it really takes away the productivity of the team and the relationships. I mean, one of the things that I hear in many of the schools that I go to, well, my manager micromanages me. And I really spend time with them on that. Meaning, does he really or she really micromanage you? Or do they just want to know the business? There's a difference between somebody not trusting you and disenfranchising or disempowering you because they don't trust that you have the capabilities to do the job. They don't trust that you know the procedure to do it, and they're looking over your shoulder and questioning you at every moment. That's a different type of a manager than somebody that just wants to be informed and wants to be kept informed at a reporting level periodically or immediately. So those are some things. Another one that I found that I work with all the time when I'm working with accounts is to convert anxiety and fear, is making sure that people stay in their circle of influence rather than get out here and encircle their circle of concern that can absolutely paralyze and stun the team. And another way you can look at this is circle of no control, of circle of concern, or the circle of influence, a circle of control that we do have control over. And when we focus on our circle of influence, that gives us hope. In most cases, when we get out of into our circle of concern or things that we can't control, that's where we become unstable. That's where we become, and I'm not saying not be real. There might be some concerns that we need to be very real about, but we need to discuss them. We need to talk about them. We need to bring them up. We need to straight talk with each other. And for us right now is how does this, there is a psychological recession going on. There is a lot of ambiguity of what the future holds. And it's amazing. We need to pull those things out and discuss them, and not just how to discuss them as leaders or as those of us that have stewardship over others. We need to discuss how it's impacting our people that are doing the job on a daily basis, and what can we do collectively together to work with that. And as you can see, as we go down through, how can you work in your circle of influence to minimize time spent in a circle of concern? I'm going to give you a couple points here just in a minute. How can we clarify the why and constantly be focused on the mission that we're doing and the activities that serves? And then talk about how do we unleash the engagement and move people up on the scale either of empowerment and or of a level of initiative. Here's some things that I have found with this. Be transparent, but also be transparent about issues you can't be transparent about. Now you might find that to be very confusing, but one of the greatest ways to move anxiety and fear to engagement is to keep people informed and create a culture that they know you're not going to allow them to be blindsided. We're going to talk about issues and we're going to straight talk. But also, whenever you're tapped on the shoulder and you have steward over others, many cases you're going to be involved in conversations that are confidential at the time. They may not be confidential downstream, but at the time, they may be confidential. And the best thing that we can do as a supervisor or director is to be transparent about those things specifically. You know what, folks? We're talking about some of the environmental concerns that we have and some of the things that may be coming down the pike. I want you to know there are changes coming right now. This is all that I can discuss here. I hope that you trust that as I have the option to be able to talk and inform you more, you will be the first to know. But right now, this is what I can say to you. Do I know more than I'm talking yet about? Yes. But I just cannot, and I don't have the liberty to discuss that now. You can build tremendous relationships doing that. Where we get blindsided or where we deplete the relationship is when we appear to be telling people the whole story, and then later they find out that we're not. You have to be careful with transparency. You have to be very careful. You have to be truthful. You have to be able to straight talk, but you also have to be able to disclose those things that you cannot talk about because of confidentiality. Create openness and let there be discussion. One of the things for me that was very difficult for me is I created openness as long as people came in and told me the things that was going to make me happy. I didn't like to be told things that would raise concern or anxiety within me. And that was something that was a problem with Chuck, not with my team. And I had to get over that. I had to strengthen my own private victory to the point that we needed to be discussing things that might be perceived as being non-discussable, or were the difficult things that we needed to talk about. But that openness can build trust and relationships. Questions give the leader the ability to address real concerns. So when people do have questions, it gives you the person that raises his hand and says, I don't quite understand. Or the person that raises his hand and says, I'm not on the same page here. Maybe the person raises his hand and says, I see it differently. Is an opportunity to build relations and relationships. And then the last one that I kind of got in my bailiwick is celebrate successes. Celebrate successes, individual as well as a team. Okay, I want to move on. I want to talk about a little bit about move with the speed of trust. Trust, if you're taking a side note, is the one thing that affects everything. I think it's the number one competency of a leader today, is to build trust within his team and within the organization. Okay. Here's something that we train a lot inside of our academy that we work with, and it's just trust is an economic driver. When trust is high, when trust is low, the speed of doing things goes down, the cost of doing them goes up. Why? Because of the way people apply the energy to get the job done. When trust is high, speed of doing it increases tremendously, and the cost, especially in energy and human capital to get things done, lowers greatly. Much easier to do things in a high trust environment, energy-wise, than it is in a low trust environment. We, within APA, train a program called the Speed of Trust, and we believe trust resonates from the outside, from the inside out, and we spend a lot of time on self-trust, relationship trust, and organizational trust. Just to give you some highlights, self-trust is basically dealing with our own personal character and competency, or the team's character and competency. Our integrity of the choices that we make and our intent of our actions and behaviors. Our competencies is the way we invest in each other, the way we share best practices, the way those best practices and so on drive results. And how do we create the atmosphere of openness to where we're sharing best practices that we get greater results together? One of the slides that I showed you previously was, I said, celebrate individually as well as a team. I'm one that I like to recognize the individual, but I always like to pull the individual success back to the team success and the contribution that's being made. Down below in the root system, the character is just knowing our mission, vision, and values, knowing intentionally what we're trying to build here together. Integrity, who I am, and my congruence. Again, one of the things that I pointed out earlier that I find on some leadership teams is the fact that we're not congruent in the way that we implement our values and so on, that we inspire to do together to create the culture that we want. We're too inconsistent. And 10 is just knowing our agenda and knowing what's going on. Capabilities, what do I know? And am I relevant? And am I keeping myself relevant? And then naturally results. What's our track record? High trust cultures, any high trust culture that I deal with is results driven. They absolutely do not shy away from measurement and keeping a handle on how well they are doing. Relationship trust goes very simple. It goes back to common truths. How well do we straight talk? How well do we demonstrate respect? I work very, very hard, but in my deep leadership core principle is the fact that I never, no matter how concerned I am about something, want to take away a person's dignity or self-respect. I just won't allow myself to go there, and I'm pretty good at managing that now. Create transparency. We've talked about right wrongs. I like to talk about right wrongs by also going the next step and say, how can I make it right? Show loyalty, I think, as a team and so on. And if I were back into that type of a role, I want to show loyalty, but I want to expect loyalty out of my team and to each other. Naturally deliver results, get better. That's building capabilities, talking about our real problems, clarifying expectations is things that I would say there, just said them. You would be surprised today in the workforce how many people do not have clear expectations to achieve the goal. So they go in and they do the very best that they can do, but they really lose that sense of connectivity between the task that I'm doing and the contribution that needs to be made to the team and to the university. Practice accountability. Again, the best form of accountability is self-accountability. Listen first, naturally. My grandmother used to say, Chucky, don't make a promise unless you intend to keep it. Keep small commitments that you make. When you're in a leadership role and you have stewardship, one of the things that can erode relationships on your team more than anything is to constantly break small commitments to where you're viewed as managing up or horizontally or vertically rather than managing horizontally. And then naturally get yourself to the point of extending trust. And then organization trust is just what's producing a dividend and what's producing a tax. And having the courage, if you will, to take a look at those things. What's truly creating, what are the symbols or other things that we have that creating a dividend in our organization? What are we doing? That's shooting ourselves in the foot. That's creating a tax. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left here, so before I take some questions, let me get through these two pretty quickly. Achieving more with less. We're probably would hate to say this, some of you might shoot me, but the fact is we're probably going to have to work smarter. We're probably going to be asked even to do more with less. So it's a matter of how do we hone ourselves and focus in and make sure that with less we're adding the value that needs to be there. Here's just a couple of things. Organizations succeed in unpredictable times, tighten their focus on building customer and employee loyalty. They align the organization around those priorities, making sure that we're really clear on the activities and so on that we're doing are the activities that our external customers need. I would also say to that is a number of people are saying now, and I believe it deeply, we have to serve internal customers, and that's our people, in order to create the external loyalty and so on that we need to be doing as a team or an organization. Align ourselves around those priorities, not rocket science. And are we, or are you individually customer focused? Here's a survey that was done a few years ago. 96% of organizations said they were customer focused. 80% believe their organizations delivered a superior customer experience. 8% of their customers agreed. A lot of that 8% is a lack of communication with their customers. Hopefully that's none of you that's on this phone today listening. But the fact is, matter of fact, I'm working right now with an organization that I'm not so sure we're in alignment with what our customers really think and what we think of ourselves. And we've got to get I've got to help them get a handle on that. Because it can either affect us positive long-term or negative. It can affect them. long term. Okay? Here's just another little quote. We have to ask ourselves whether times like these require getting the most things done or getting a sharp focus on getting the most important things done. Here's a little thing that I have included that is kind of a job to be done analyzer that again you can get. And asking yourself these three questions: what's your team's most important? Who are your team's most important customers? What are the customers' most important goals? And what specific job are they hiring us to do? Execute priorities with excellence. Here's barriers to being able to accomplish execution with excellence. Focusing on top goals, there's too many. I find this to be true all the time. And or they don't cascade vertically through the organization. So each business unit, if you will, creates their own goals, but with a lack of having connectivity. They're not defined well, that people can truly understand them. A few know what they mean, but as they cascade vertically through the organization and become ambiguous. People get distracted from the goals. Basically, they get caught up in what we refer to as the whirlwind, the day job. I call that the pounding surf as well. This was one of my personal pitfalls. I can easily get caught up, especially when I'm too much into my circle of concern or no control. I can get caught up into all of the things that in my mindset need to be done to where I lose focus on the most important things I need to do. Another barrier, making sure everyone knows a specific job to be done to achieve these goals. Here's the barriers. Leaders don't engage team members in deciding how the goals will be achieved. In other words, this is where you create your openness. This is where you create communication. This is where you have straight talk. You have transparency, and you talk about reality. And this is where, as a leader, sometimes you might feel vulnerable because you have to listen. Teams are not given time and the opportunity to learn how to achieve the goal. I find in FM and operations, basically, we're pretty good at investing in building people's capabilities. I mean, that's the whole mission of APA, is being there for you to help you invest in your people so they can achieve what needs to be done by the organization. I find for the most part, that's one of the strengths as I work with schools around the nation. What should we do we've never done before? And what should we stop doing that we no longer are effective at? It's amazing to me sometimes when I'll go into one of our organizations and, well, that's the way it's always been done. Or Bob will never allow us to do this any different. Or another one that I get sometimes, well, that's the way Jerry told us to do it. And I said, well, I'd like to talk to Jerry and see if he's open to talking to you guys about doing it. Well, Jerry retired 10 years ago, but we're still doing it the way Jerry told us to do it. I know, I'm hoping some of you are laughing because I do get that, even to this day. And having a trial and error period, in other words, doing everything as a pilot. You know, dare to try it, dare to risk, but also have the courage to pull it back in if it's not working. Another one's keeping score. Don't measure too much. Some organizations have a tendency to measure too much. What lag measures are is lagging data that we can't influence. Focus on lead behaviors and so on. And those behaviors change are, if you will, forcing change inside our organization in the way that we do things. We don't pay attention to lead measures. And those are lead behaviors that produce new and different and better results. Keeping score is cumbersome. What I have found though, scorekeeping can really, a lot of people use scorekeeping as punitive, showing that people were lagging. But scorekeeping can also be used to have crucial conversations around what do we need to do differently to move the needle and be more successful. But it also gives a team a tremendous, especially when they're achieving the goal. We need to take time and we need to celebrate, and scorekeeping can help us do that. Regular cycles of follow through as a barrier. Announce grand goals and fully expect it to happen. Okay, we don't revisit progress and goals regularly as we should. And I would say if it's important and it's one of your top 4 or 5 priorities, my thing would be bi-weekly, or not, excuse me, bi-monthly. At least talk about them in a team meeting twice a month. That seems a little excessive. At least once a month, and show how we're winning or how we're falling short. Team members conclude they weren't serious about the goal and return to their normal day job. This is a huge one. I would star that. Is if we as leaders aren't serious about the goal and keeping it, what they do is they go back to the normal day job of what they believe they need to do to stay stable and secure in their role, and they can lose sight of the goal very, very, very quickly. Okay, I'm going to move through this one very quickly. 15% of workers can name the top 4 goals of their organization. 40% know what to do about the goals. That means 60% in an average organization doesn't. 9% feel very high levels of commitment to the goal. And mostly that reason is because they're personally committed to doing a good job themselves. So let's kind of, I know I got Billy sitting there saying, Chuck, put it on hold so you can at least answer some questions if anybody has them. But when it comes to working with our people and giving them the stability and security and feeling of contribution, I find these 4 things to be very, very excellent tools in our quiver, if you will. How do we constantly aware of transforming fear is natural? How do we address it and drive it into engagement? How are we constantly working on building trust within our organization? How are we talking about and not letting having to do more with less strap us down to the point that we become victims with that concept? And then how do we set ourselves up to win, that no matter what is happening to us environmentally, we still are doing the small things that we can in our circle of influence to be able to get the results that we need. And with that, Billy, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you. We have some really good questions coming in. And our first question is, when a senior leadership walks right by you and doesn't acknowledge you, what should you do?
Well, I'm going to say something that I hope people don't get offended by. But with most of what we've talked about here, one of the things that we can't do specifically if we're not senior leadership is we can't wait for senior leadership to buy in to the way I'm going to manage my own stewardship. Because I've been in some situations in the last 35 years that if you wait for that moment, you'll wait till hell freezes over. Again, I hope some of you are laughing at that statement. But you're not going to change if you're in a situation to where senior leadership is ignoring you, senior leadership isn't doing some of these things, senior leadership isn't giving your business unit the attention that you need. You can change that as much as you can by focusing your circle of influence and hoping that person will change. But the key thing is is that doesn't have to cascade down to your stewardship and your team. That's probably not what you want to hear, but that's shooting straight and as real with you as I can. Okay?
Thank you, Jeff. Next question. What is one piece of advice you would give a manager who is taking over a role from a longtime department director when staff morale is currently low, budgets are teetering, definitely worn out by years of being asked to do more with less?
To a new manager?
Yes.
A new manager, yes, Billy?
Yes, sir.
Okay, there are going to be paradigms that have been created by past management that are going to benefit your team, but there's also going to be paradigms and procedures that limit the team and or limit to where you want to move them. I think rather than being condescending or talking down, the best thing that you can do is to respect that it is what it is, that the paradigms are what they are. And in the beginning, have regular meetings with the new reality you want to create with your team, to be very open with that discussion, to be very open and hear what's been troubling, but also what they feel has been good, if you will. But the best thing is dialogue and communication, and to do it in an organized, regular way, and also realize the fact that you're not going to change the tide of a direction of a team that has low morale or anything. It's not a light switch technology. You've got to think long term. If I were your executive coach, I would say, don't get your dauber down until the 18th or 24-month period, because paradigms are hard to change. You're going to have to earn their trust. They're going to have to realize it's a new day, and just be very clear on where you want to move the team, and be resilient and looking longer term than short term on making that happen. The other thing that I would say is that team at times is going to frustrate you. Individuals on that team is going to greatly frustrate you. Show a pattern of not saving up stamps. And by that, I mean, my mother used to have green stamps and she'd go cash them in. We do the same thing with people emotionally. Let your team know as things happen that you are not in alignment with or are concerned about, that you're going to address those things right up front. So you can address them with respect and dignity, and not address them in a way that you're addressing that individual employer down or that individual team down. Be able to have a conversation that's respectful rather than coming at them with a hammer. And when we save up stamps and we don't address things, I call that having a crucial conversation. Because you will, as you want to create change, and as your other team members want to create change. The other thing that I would say too is you need to address it, because if you don't address certain things that are troubling to you to move the needle, the ones that want the needle moved will start to resent you over time, that you're not doing anything. And so that's almost an hour conversation that if you want to call me, I would be glad to take your call if you can work with Billy, and I would be glad to even give you some more ideas around that, because I think a lot of us find ourselves in that situation.
Well, that's the last of our questions, Chuck, for now. I want to thank you for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule to do this presentation for us today. And to the attendees, thank you so much for your time. Be safe, stay healthy. Until next time, have a good day.
And thank you all.